This story has a semi-long intro, so please bear with me. In the year 2013, I was a sophomore in high school in SoCal. I had earlier that year moved to a city called Menifee, which is mainly a suburb for the working folk in Riverside County. Anyways, while I was a new kid, I still was able to make a friend or two pretty quickly. I'm changing their names for ambiguity reasons. Let's call them Brad, Jacob, and Austin. Bradley being my closest friend among the three to this day. I remember it being on a Friday during that year's fall season. They all happened to live on a cul-de-sac, which was about over a mile and a half from where I lived. Since my neighborhood consisted of elderly people, I usually spent my time over at theirs, at around noon till late the very early morning the next day. Well, the day of my story's occurrence happened to be one of those days. Frankly, I don't remember what we actually did that day. All I remember was, since it was Friday, my mom allowed me to stay out later. When the time reached around midnight, my mom texted me and told me to come home as she was going to sleep. I would have asked my friends if their parents could give me a ride home, but unfortunately they were all fast asleep, and I didn't want to bug by asking if I could sleep over. So I gave my friends a farewell and headed home. When 5 minutes into my journey, I actually didn't mind having to walk. The air was nice and cool, and I always loved the night sky. Between mine and my friends' homes, there was an elementary school with a wide green flat park right next to it. The park having no lights and being totally pitch black. I was about to pass the park when I noticed a man sitting on a bench near a corner of the park closest to me. He was sitting about 100 feet away. I couldn't really see his face, but could decipher that he was tall, bald, white guy in a black hoodie and shorts. Besides glancing at him once and taking in all those said details about him, I didn't really pay much mind to him and continued on my way. I just kept walking forward, occasionally glancing at my phone for no particular reason. When I neared a lamppost near the sidewalk I was traveling on, I noticed that when I looked down in front of me, a second shadow opposite my own was casted. I instantly thought it was somebody else. That guy I had seen earlier most likely being the caster. I quickened my pace while trying not to make it too obvious, to get some distance between me and whoever was behind me. Now, some people probably wouldn't mind or care if they had to share the sidewalk with a stranger, but since it was late at night and I'm a pretty scrawny guy, I didn't want to risk getting mugged. Eventually, I decided to cross the street. I looked both ways for cars, but obviously it was to see who was behind me, and sure enough, it was the same man. It was a little bit brighter due to there being lampposts, and I quickly got another look at him. He was built and about 6 feet tall. After I crossed, I continued down my same route, but shortly after, I noticed that guy had also crossed the street and was once again right behind me. Okay, now I was really starting to freak out as my heart began to beat faster. Up ahead, the street, which turned off the road and into my neighbor's house, was within sight. At first, I felt relieved, but then realized that I didn't want that guy to follow me home and know where I lived. Instead of turning onto my street, I continued walking forward until I approached another street, coming off the main road. I quickly sped up and turned in, and once I knew I was a little out of sight, I began to jog away quickly. When I was like 100 yards away from the mouth of the street, I twisted my head around to clarify if the man had continued following me. He was. And not just following, he was full-on sprinting. At that moment, I just decided, fuck it, and also began to sprint away. I didn't even know where I was at that point, or which new street I was running onto. I just had to get away. After running for a while, I ended up thinking of the idea to run to the side of a house that had 2 trash cans next to it. I laid flat on my belly and faced the street. Luckily for me, I had been wearing a black jacket, so hopefully, I was able to blend into the darkness around me. I laid there for like a minute when the guy happened to stop running on the sidewalk, near where I was laying. He stood there and scanned the area around me. My heart stopped when he looked my way. When he couldn't see me, he continued running in the direction he had been facing. I waited there for 5 more minutes, so that he would be long gone. Afterwards, I bolted straight home, but still took me a half an hour. I never told my parents about that experience, since we had finally settled in. and I had my own group of friends and didn't want to risk moving again. The event itself slowly faded from my mind until recently. My only precaution was to never walk home in that time again. I never found out who that guy was, but in the years following, I discovered that in the early 2000s, the local high school had a neo-Nazi problem, but had since been rooted out. I'm not positive that's why he ran after me, but it does seem possible that a white supremacist wouldn't mind roughing up a smaller Latino in the middle of the night, with no one else around. The story takes place in the same house as a basement incident from when I was 3 years old. I was about 12 going on 13 at the time, and had outgrown my previous bedroom, so my grandparents decided I needed a little more space. They helped me to move my things into the bedroom at the top of the landing on the second floor of the house just next to my old bedroom. The first few nights I spent in the room were nothing special, though I did feel a little uneasy at first. I attributed it to being that I wasn't used to the room yet, but all the while I couldn't help but feel that I was being watched. About a week after I had moved into my new room, for whatever reason, something had woken me up around 3:30 a.m. I don't know why, but something just told me to look towards my bedroom door. It was then that I saw a faint red glow in the doorway. It looked like someone was burning a candle at the bottom of the stairs. The glow got stronger at first, then after a while it faded out and disappeared. I tried to brush it off as just my imagination playing tricks on me. I closed my eyes and tried my best to get back to sleep, but not long after I closed my eyes, I heard what sounded like a set of heavy footsteps making their way up the stairs towards my room. There are 13 steps on our staircase leading up to the second floor of our house, and as narrow as our hallway is, you could stop at the second step to the top, lean over and look directly into my bedroom. The footsteps stopped on the 12th step right outside my doorway, and I could feel a pair of eyes looking in on me. My heart was pounding like a drum, and I could barely breathe. I gathered what strength I could and jumped from my bed, ran to my bedroom door and slammed it shut. I then heard the sound of footsteps making their way back downstairs. I stayed there the rest of the night huddled up against the back of my bedroom door. The following morning, my grandfather asked if I had woken up in the middle of the night and had gone downstairs to the kitchen. I told him I hadn't, but I did tell him what had happened to me that night. He dismissed it as me being imaginative, and I was probably just seeing the lights of a passing car. Only one problem with that theory, though. Our house is on a side street, and my bedroom doorway faces that street. It hadn't seen the light of a car going by. It would have come in from the window, not from the staircase outside my door, and it sure as hell wouldn't have been glowing red. My grandmother was able to convince my grandfather to go out and get a new lock for my bedroom door later that day, and he had installed it later that same night. Several weeks went by without incident, and it was around the middle of spring at this point. I started sleeping with a chain on my bedroom door that my grandfather installed for me. It took me forever to fall asleep because of the unnerving feeling of someone watching me, but I eventually passed out. I remember every detail of the dream I had that night, as it was just yesterday. I found myself standing on a long, narrow corridor that from what I remember looked like a hospital. At one end of the hall it was like light, so bright that it was blinding. At the other end of the hall it was pitch black, so dark that you couldn't see a hand in front of your face. I remember feeling as though I was being stared down from the dark end of a hallway. I could just barely make out a figure standing there in the darkness, close enough to where I could just make out its form. It looked like a tall, short of humanoid figure wearing a black robe with the hood up hiding its face. My curiosity got the better of me as I remember slowly moving towards whatever this thing was, trying to get a better look at it. The last thing I remember before waking up was a pair of hands, almost skeletal in appearance, flying right at my face. When I awoke, my bedroom was freezing cold. It was almost like I had woken up in an industrial-sized freezer. Keeping in mind it was springtime at this point, and since the house was so old, we had no central air conditioning. So there was no reason for it to be as cold as it was. I remember lying there in my bed trying to scream out, but not being able to make a sound. I tried to scream as best I could, but all that escaped my lips was a whimper followed by muffled gasps for air, and I could feel my eyes beginning to water. I tried to roll out of bed, but I felt like I was being pinned down. My body was frozen, but I remember still being able to move my eyes. Something drew my attention towards my bedroom door again, and I was terrified to see that the chain was off the lock, and the door was all the way open now. No, it wasn't just slightly open. I mean, this goddamn door had the chain ripped completely off, and the door was wide open, almost as though someone had kicked it open with all their strength. I was overwhelmed with a feeling of dread. It was like a feeling of death in the air. I could see that same figure standing in my bedroom doorway, just as I had seen in my dream. More like a nightmare, really. I could feel that whatever this thing was, it was trying to get into my room. I could tell that whatever its intentions were, they weren't good. But there was something pushing it back. My grandmother was very devout in her faith as a Christian, and she had portraits of Jesus hanging in all the bedrooms. As I remembered this, the feeling of dread slowly subsided. I turned my eyes away from the doorway and toward the portrait of Jesus that my grandmother had hung on the wall over my bed. Thanks for listening, guys. Sinful Savant here. I just want to thank you guys for listening. Please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video. And I want to give some credit to the BrosGrim. It's kind of a new royalty-free horror website for short stories.